Inside Boxing Daily on the Grueling Truth Sports Network. Inside Boxing Daily is brought to you by the Retired Boxers Foundation with Jackie Richardson and Alex Ramos. Make sure you check them out on Facebook. Also by Seat Giant. Go to Seat Giant, use the promo code TGT to get a 5% discount on your ticket purchases. We're also brought to you by the Handicapping Guide. You can check them out halfway down on the gruelingtruth.com page. And the Sheridan Report, which you can hear daily at 3 o'clock approximately, giving you all of your betting needs. I am your co-host for Inside Boxing Daily, Mike Goodpaster, and right now I'd like to welcome in Jeremiah Preisser. How you doing, Jeremiah?
Mike. Let's get it going.
You're creepy sometimes. All right, and sometimes it feels like we're doing an episode of Beavis and Butthead, too. All right. Speaking of which, we have Butthead here tonight. He was one of the co-authors for Intimate Warfare with Dennis Taylor. Help me welcome to the show, the lead writer at Max Boxing Magazine, the second best place you can find your boxing news after thegruelingtruth.com. John Raspanti. How you doing, John?
How you guys doing? I'm doing great. Always wonderful to be on with you guys. Feels more like the Three Stooges than anything else. But, that's okay. We'll let that go and have fun, right?
Yeah, I think I'll be curly because I'm bald.
Yeah, it works.
All right. Let's start off with all the boxing news for today.
Okay.
All right. Now we're going to move on, and we're going to talk about our topics tonight. We're going to start off talking about the political significance of Joe Louis. I saw on social media, I had a couple youngins attack me because I made the comment that I thought politically the influence that they had when they were at their peak, I don't think anybody was close to Muhammad Ali or Joe Louis. And I had a few people attack me and tell me I didn't know what I was talking about, that Muhammad Ali was much more significant than Joe Louis. So let's go ahead. Let's have the discussion about Joe Louis today because John is even older than me. Jeremiah is young, but he's not stupid like most of the people you see that are younger on Facebook and Twitter and all that. And today, I think, is the anniversary to one of the most famous fights ever fought, which was Max Schmeling stopping Joe Louis in the 11th round, June 19th, 1936. And I know, John, you were there live watching that fight, right?
My dad was, Mike. You're getting a little cruel tonight, but my dad's same name, though. So he wasn't there, actually. He was home in Chicago. He was there when Joe Louis won the title the next year against the Cinderella Man. But he was there listening to the radio and expecting Joe Louis to win easy. I think he was like a 10-1 favorite or something like that. Louis Schmeling hadn't fought much, and Joe had put away Max Baer and Primo Carnera very easily, so it was expected to be another easy fight. And from what I read, Joe didn't train very hard. So when he got knocked out in the 12th round, it was a shocker.
Well, go ahead. I thought you were done.
I would say, and if you watch the fight, I actually watched it a few weeks ago, and I was surprised in a way that Joe Louis just did not look good even before he got hurt badly. I mean, I don't think he ever recovered fourth round when he got knocked down, but he was jabbing, but he was not crisp and sharp like he usually was. And Max Schmeling just got more confident and just laid in weight. He hit him so many times with that right hand. It was incredible. But that was a time, Mike and Jeremiah, it's hard for us to realize, but that was before television and everybody listened to everything on the radio. And when the fight was over, my dad would say that his Joe Louis fights, they would all come out on the street in Chicago, and he lived in an Italian neighborhood. And this ties into what you were saying, Mike, that about the power of Joe Louis, first black heavyweight champion since Jack Johnson, and he wasn't champ yet, but he was significant in that sense. And they had told him to be a certain way, not to really never to smile or anything. He knocked the guy out, just go to his corner. And if you watch film, you see that. But he was so popular already. I think it was like 24-0 with 20 knockouts or something like that, that he had already crossed over. So like I said, my dad living in an Italian neighborhood, he was born there in 1927, Chicago, but he had crossed over where Italians really liked him. So he was already having an influence, and then it would just grow after this, as we know, when he fought Schmeling the second time, the whole country was united against.
The thing that I really noticed, because I watched Louis Schmeling one again today before my power went off, and the thing that really stuck out to me was the fact that Louis would throw that jab, and he got hit with the right hands, Jeremiah. It looked like to me, because when he would throw his jab, he would lean his head to the right, which would put it right in line to get hit there, where when you're throwing the jab, you should be moving your head to the left, correct?
Well, so you notice that a lot of guys back in the day, Joe Louis and many others, they had a tendency to keep their head on the right-hand side, and kind of tuck their chin in behind their left shoulder. And in a way, it helped keep the distance. Like a lot of these modern guys have more of an Oscar de la Hoya style where they're a bit more squared up and it's a bit funner offensively. But yeah, back in the day, a lot of people fought like Joe Louis in the sense that they kept their right hand, their head in that position. And Louis was certainly one of those guys too. And I think he continued doing it, but I just think he was a lot more responsible with his defense afterwards. But yeah, he had a tendency to drop the jab. And it's been said many, many times, but, Max Schmeling was like, hey, I see something, and we've heard that a few times since, like Mikey Garcia versus Errol Spence. Well, it turns out Max Schmeling actually did see something.
Yeah.
And
Mikey
he saw something. We're just not sure what it is. Yeah. But it was probably just one of those things. They were in camp and, they were watching footage and they were like, oh, hey, it's kind of like the guy sitting on a couch like, oh, well, why doesn't he jab more? Well, it's a lot easier to say that when you're, sitting in comfy in your sofa as opposed to being in a ring when a guy's actually fighting back. But yeah, Louis had a tendency to drop the jab, and Schmeling, what I was alarmed about was the jab itself, because Louis really did have an excellent jab. But, the lazy jab that he was throwing before, lazier jab, I don't want to say it was lazy because, he was still doing a great job and beating good fighters, prior to that point. So I still think he had a good jab. But, when you're dealing with a wily old veteran like Max Schmeling, and a lot of people did think that Schmeling was old. I mean, this is not, 2018, 2019, right? When you were 30 years old back then, you were considered on the other side of the hill, especially as a heavyweight. And Schmeling was obviously highly ranked still, but this was, perceived as just a stepping stone to the title itself. And Schmeling I was alarmed. I mean, I remember watching this the first time, and I wasn't really that involved, in the whole thing. Like I wasn't really reading, what happened beforehand, where these guys were ranked or any of that stuff. I just kind of watched the fight as is, and Schmeling was just very crafty with the way he was doing things. And John was talking about the jab itself and how it was kind of lazy. Well, I mean, you even look at the last round itself, even before that, if you wish. But Schmeling would just, and as he said too, his confidence was growing and growing. But yeah, you could see that he was just unafraid of what was coming at him, and he was doing a great job of slipping and sliding, and then just whenever he wanted to unleash the right hand, he was just pinpoint with his accuracy, and he was just shellacking him all night with that thing until the finish.
Yeah, and the thing about this, John, is we saw, Andy Ruiz with what everybody thought was a monumental upset. I think that this upset was bigger than that, the way Louis was perceived, and I think Louis was a 10-1 favorite in this fight. And I think when you look back on it, Andy Ruiz, to me, he makes the top 15 because he did my list, I think, at 12 or 13. But a fight like this, I think, is a much bigger upset than what we just saw even, because people thought Anthony Joshua was the best heavyweight in the world. People knew in 1936 Joe Louis was, and this was a huge shock.
Exactly, and Louis would always be susceptible to right hands, even though he tweaked his defense a little bit and worked on that for the second fight. You see the second fight, he's got his guard up a little bit more, but he's still, like you guys explained about his head, but he was more responsible, but his jab was a little higher. And, he get knocked down, I think, 3 times in the 2 fights by Jersey Joe Walcott with right hands. And Paisan Tammy Morelli almost knocked him down in 1947 with a right hand. So the right hand was his kryptonite. But he was considered. He was already, even by 1935, after knocking out Max Baer, and Primo is actually Primo first, I think, and then Max Baer. People were like, "Oh, this guy is invincible." We knew the flaws of Anthony Joshua. We knew that. We talked about it before. We just didn't know who was going to execute it, and it happened, I think, earlier than we expected. But Joe Louis, there was really no flaws, except I read that Jack Johnson said something about a flaw, but nobody really paid any attention to him. But he was considered. They had him already up there with Jack Dempsey at that point, and Dempsey had retired, believe it or not, only 9 years before that, in 1927. So they were talking about that he was as good or already better than Jack Dempsey, and we all have opinions about how good Jack Dempsey was, but he was a god in 1936 or whatever. So you put that into consideration and think about it. But he was. That was, and my dad talked about that. He said when everybody came out on the street, everybody was so shocked they couldn't say anything. And as for the writers, if you read any of the stories after the stoppage, the knockout, the whole boxing world was completely in shock.
Yeah, well, that's one thing we talked about, John. We actually talked about it not long ago about how, some of these new guys get it twisted about how, accessible, these guys were and what their reputation was around the country. I mean, it's like they act as if because Instagram and Facebook and Twitter were didn't exist or weren't even a thought, weren't even a seed in anybody's mind by that point. They think that, somehow word didn't travel and that, therefore the significance was lesser. But I mean, this was a thing where, entire families, right, would huddle around,
Right.
The radio and, listen to things. And it still matters too, that word of mouth can travel very quickly too. I mean, they still had wires. They still had,
wasn't it,
they had,
I got a question for John, because I've seen this before, but didn't they, when they had a big fight like this, didn't they set up a ticker in Times Square for people to come down and actually find out what was going on?
I wasn't in New York at the time to see that, Mike, but they did do that with big fights, and I don't know if
because I know they did that with the World Series also.
Yes, that's right. Now, I don't know if they did it with this fight because I think it was considered basically a shoe-in for Lewis that he was going to knock out Schmeling. But I believe they did it when he fought James J. Braddock the next year. But, they had teletype machines like we were talking about, and then word of mouth, that's right. The word got out quickly what happened, and New York, Chicago, all the big cities knew exactly because it was the radio, and that's what everybody did. Boxing was different in those days in the sense that it was so much more popular than now. That
it was more popular than any sport at that time, I think, John, Jeremiah, and I think that's what people miss here. When you talk about the significance of a boxer, I mean, in the 1970s, 60s, I think baseball was the big dog. But when you look from 1900 to 1950, I think the big dog was boxing.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure when, baseball took over because I'm not a baseball historian. But yeah, I mean, it was certainly big. And another thing too is the mediums, right? It's like it was anybody who studied boxing history, anybody pre-World War II knows that even small fights saturated big newspapers. I mean, you can catch all sorts of clippings from, like I'm writing an article on Midget Walgast, and he's a small guy. Didn't get as much attention as the heavyweights, but you could still find like when he fought Black Bill in I think it was Brooklyn. I mean, I could find at least, 6 or 7 newspapers that had accounts on it, and these are being wire transferred to places like Philadelphia and whatnot. I mean, and it's one of those things too. It's like when you watch TV in even just the 70s and 80s, there's a thing where the dad took his newspaper to the toilet and read it. This is what people were doing back in the day. Those were the mediums. So, so when you look at the totality of people reading newspapers and listening to the radio, the impact is greater, I think, in some ways than it can be on social media. Again, I know that, you've sort of got a microphone to the world, but you think because not there's so many different news sources nowadays and so many things, like everybody's just trying to get their voice out there. So if you're living in some little town in Wisconsin, they probably have their local rag, right? So you just read that every day. So what I'm saying is, like, there were set things that a lot of these people were doing. So I just think it's a bit silly to say that Joe Louis didn't have a significant, political influence on, or wasn't a major figure in the United States just because of the mediums. It just doesn't make sense to me. But I was impressed by Max Schmeling, and I gotta say, I think the win should hold some weight because I know it's convenient that we kind of gloss over it and say, well, hey, Joe Louis got Max Schmeling in the rematch. But, to be honest with you, Max Schmeling, and again, Louis was a bit green then, and Schmeling was, a bit over the hill by that time. So it wasn't a prime for prime matchup. But, in the rematch itself, Schmeling was a bit older. I think Joe Louis gets him out of there regardless if they ever rematch, even in his prime. But it was one of those things that Schmeling was just a bit more over the hill. So I think the first fight is damn impressive, and I think it's one of the best wins a heavyweight has ever gotten.
Yeah, and John, I think the other thing people miss was the times. In the 60s, I mean, if you're an African American, you were made to feel good about yourself by Muhammad Ali, but you also had Martin Luther King. In the 1930s, I mean, I've talked to some older people before that talk about what their parents talked about with Joe Louis and sitting around and how proud that made them. And I think that Joe Louis was a guy that gave immense self-worth to African Americans in the 1930s, which is something that was huge at that time because this is a time when you still couldn't go eat as a black person in a lunch counter in Indiana.
Oh, absolutely. He gave them a lot of pride. He was an icon, an idol to all of them. They loved him everywhere he went. He was mobbed. He was a god. And that's another thing. Anybody who ever tries to diminish the importance of Joe Louis, it's ridiculous. I mean, all you got to do is open your eyes and read or do a little research. It's not a coincidence that when Muhammad Ali was becoming very famous and became the champion, that Joe Louis and Muhammad Ali, there were pictures taken of them together because they both were icons and they were both so important in their time. Now, in totally different ways, in the sense that the 60s and the 1930s were totally different. I mean, when Joe Louis said, "We will win, God is on our side," or whatever, before, I don't think I said that exactly right. I was paraphrasing. During World War II, he just ad-libbed that, and it made him even more popular. And that's how he was. That's what he thought. He went into the military. It was just a totally different time, his time and Muhammad Ali's. So, but the pride that you're talking about and how much he was loved and inspired, yes, very much so with both. And it didn't happen for exactly a while with Muhammad. For some people, it was more polarizing in the 60s, and then he became beloved. But Joe Louis was loved, and it's interesting to note, and I thought of this today, that his first knockout, when he lost, he was knocked out. In his last fight, he was knocked out. So I just thought that was kind of interesting that those were the only two times that he didn't get up when he was knocked down. But he did a lot of wonderful things in his life.
And you talked about when he was in the military, and the thing that stood out to me when I read about him was the fact that when he went into the military, they would allow him to go wherever he wanted to eat. Other black soldiers weren't allowed, and Joe would say, "I'm not going in to eat there unless all these guys are allowed to." So to sit there and say that Cassius Clay, Muhammad Ali, whatever you want to call him, didn't have the same kind of socio-economic impact, I think is a little short-sighted. I think it's people that don't really understand about the times that we're talking about. And to do that in the military at that time and to stand up for what you believe in, because let's face it, he's Joe Louis. He's going to get what he wants. And what he wanted was for everybody to be equal. And in the end, he did, at least in his own little world, own little space, he did accomplish that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right. Well, and it's another thing, too, is that, he put it on the line. See, there is a bit difference there. And again, I understand the nuance of the debate. But, Joe Louis did the whole World War II thing and gave up prime years. I mean, imagine, I had brought this up on a previous show, but imagine if he had...
Too, so.
Right, I understand. But what I'm saying is he gave up prime years for the war effort. And, imagining he didn't, how many title defenses does he then have? I don't know, 30 or, some absurd total? I don't know. Maybe he gets upset. You never really know. But, he did give up years for the war effort itself. He was a figurehead in that regard. And a lot of guys were. It was back then it was kind of viewed as, you must do your patriotic duty and contribute. And Joe Louis did that. And he was, like you guys said, he was he's more palatable to the masses than a guy like Ali was, especially initially. You look at Ali, and a lot of people viewed him as a loudmouth in the beginning.
Because the anti-war effort really didn't kick in until about 1968, was it, John? Right around there, give or take?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Right around there, yep.
So, when he started doing that, it was not a popular stance to take.
Exactly, and Joe Louis even donated his purse from a couple of fights, I believe, to the war effort. How many people do that? So he did all kinds of things that were obviously patriotic, but what he did in his time. So it all has to be taken for what it is. And he was just a very special person in a lot of ways, and obviously a tremendous fighter.
All right. Then we talk about the fight with Braddock, because I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, John or Jeremiah, Braddock was actually supposed to defend against Schmeling and had a hand injury, ended up pulling out. And from everything I heard, the reason Louis got the shot over Braddock is because they were afraid that basically Nazi Germany and Adolf Hitler, if they got their hands on the heavyweight championship, they're just going to go off and hide with the belt.
Mm.
And I think that makes it even more impressive, Jeremiah, that Joe Louis still fought him again, because he probably had some pressure not to fight him.
Yeah, probably did. I can only imagine the kind of, pressure put on you when you have that sort of, political atmosphere swirling around you. It's a ton of pressure. And to be honest with you, Joe Louis took it in stride. That shows you the kind of man that he was, to have all this stuff, beating down on him, mentally. And he just, as if it's nothing, he just goes and whips, Max Schmeling's ass. It's funny, we've talked about some of this historical revisionism, like what would have happened if Billy Conn and Joe Louis, was only 12 rounds. And imagine, had we had to deal with, Nazi Germany and Max Schmeling holding the title hostage for a few years, and what implications that might have had. But yeah, Joe Louis stepped up and got the job done, and won one of the most historic heavyweight fights to ever have happened. But yeah, I'm not exactly sure. I've never really studied Max Schmeling in depth, so I'm not quite sure what the pressure was for him, or what his connection was to Hitler or the Nazi Party or any of that. So I'm a bit in the dark when it comes to that. But Joe Louis, I understood what he was going through, because again, it was kind of viewed as fascism versus democracy. Again, you have the war effort going on. But Schmeling, I'm not as familiar with. I don't know if you guys can add some context to that or not.
Well, I would go here, John. I think it's clear that he was not a Nazi, but my biggest problem with him was he did get a lot of people that were his friends. He kept them safe. But you had people like Marlene Dietrich that came to this country and warned everybody about Hitler, where Max Schmeling, I can't remember if it was before the first or second Lewis fight, he actually came here and told everybody everything was fine back there. So I don't look at him as a Nazi, but I do look at him as somebody who basically was covering his own ass and just staying where he was.
Yeah, you read about him, and he was pretty much talking out of both sides of his mouth. That's pretty much how I would characterize it. He wanted to keep everything cool at home with Hitler, but then again, he wanted to be able to come to America. And back to Joe Louis for a second. One of the most famous quotes from Joe Louis was when he won the title. And again, I'm paraphrasing, but he said something like, "Well, I won't be the real champion until I beat Schmeling."
Yeah.
So, to him, there was no doubt that he was going to fight Schmeling again, and they became lifelong friends, as we know, and Schmeling helped him out financially and everything. But the whole thing with him and the Nazis, like I said, I don't think he really had enough backbone in the sense to really go against Hitler. You would think that based on what Hitler was, that he would have been glad to stay in America or whatever, but he felt a certain loyalty to Germany. He had fights there, and so he went home. But he was sitting on the fence, I think, is another way to put it. And if you read about him, because for years it was no, he wasn't a Nazi. He was this and that. But then if you read a little deeper, and I know you did, Mike, as I did, that you find out that no, it wasn't exactly like that either. It wasn't black and white. It was gray. And he was, I would say, probably if I was him, I wouldn't exactly be real proud of some of the things that I did during that period. I mean, he was taking care of himself and his friends, but he really wasn't making a real stand against Hitler, and that might have been something he regretted later. Who knows?
Yeah, and I think that's really hard to say what we would do in that situation, because actually he probably took the easier way out. I don't know if it was the safest, though, because if he just comes to this country and tells everybody what's going on there, he doesn't have to go back.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I certainly understand that line of reasoning too, because most people are the same way. We can talk about Nazi Germany and Max Schmeling, but most people are the same way as Max Schmeling is in situations like that, where it makes them uncomfortable, but they don't want to ruffle any feathers either way. Right. So they just kind of want to stay in their zone and not disrupt their financial means. I mean, because, going out and, maybe disrespecting Hitler on American shores. It doesn't only have implications for him. It has implications for his family. It has implications for the country. It has big implications for himself, right? I mean, if Nazi Germany was like, well, this guy's a traitor, forget him, yada, yada, yada. I mean, it's a very scary situation. I mean, it's one thing, like most people do this every day in their career fields where they're like, oh, well, like imagining you see your boss do something wrong and you don't know whether to say something or not. And, it's like you're kind of friendly with them, but you don't want to get in trouble. You don't want to go to HR. Sure. Maybe you be viewed. You know what I mean?
In my defense, I always got fired in those cases. So.
So there you go. But most people are careerists. Most people are looking out for themselves and their own, like immediate community. So I do understand where Max Schmeling was coming from, sure. But I don't know if Max Schmeling was aware of. I mean, was he aware of the Jews being deported? It's a bit of a dark area for me, but was he aware of the extent of everything that was going on?
I would think he was, because he had a lot of friends that were Jewish. So I think he knew that. And also, wasn't he in a Panzer division after he got his ass knocked out?
Yeah.
So, he actually fought for the Nazis, too. So it drives me nuts, the revisionist history, because when I bring up the fact that he did fight for the Nazis, that everybody's like, well, he wasn't really a Nazi. And, what makes you a Nazi and what makes you not a Nazi? I think that if you're fighting for Nazis, you're a Nazi. I don't care if you're a member or not. If you're fighting for it, you're a member. And, and something like that, and as heinous as what they did was, I just find a hard time forgiving it. Now, I've read a lot about Max Schmeling. He was a great guy. I mean, he helped Joe Louis out immensely. I think he made a ton of money. Was that Coke or Pepsi or something he took over to Germany?
Yeah, Coca-Cola.
Yeah. And he lived to be close to 100 years old. I think he was in his 90s when he passed away, wasn't he, John?
Yeah, that's right. 95, I think.
Yeah, so he lived a great life, but there is that one stain, and to me, it's just a stain the heart is hard to forget about.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if you want to be, you could say that he made a pragmatic decision based on what was going on in his life, but like I said, I would think that later on he might have regretted it. I would think he did regret it, but he was taking care of the number one, and Jeremiah made a good point. I mean, we do deal with that in life. There are people we don't like, but we're afraid to say anything because we don't want to mess up our little life. And that might have been it. He was trying to juggle the Hitler over here and then trying to be with America over here because he knew he'd probably make more money in America. So I'm not condoning it, but that doesn't mean that I can't understand it and can't see a little bit where he was coming from.
Yeah, I do too. It just bugs me just because, especially looking back at the atrocities that were committed. Now, the second fight between Louis and Schmeling, the thing that I noticed, it was only a minute and a half long, and I remember the ticket prices from what I read were like $30, and that's a little cheaper than it is now. But the thing I remember was when Louis did try to throw his right hand in the second fight, and it happened like 2 or 3 times in that minute and a half, was the fact that Louis kind of saw it coming. It would just kind of lean back a little and then counter it. And I think the thing that was most impressive to me, and it's for whichever one of you want to answer, is I watched a lot of Joe Louis over the last few months because I know Buddy Gibbs, who I respect, kept telling me Joe Louis was better than Muhammad Ali. I watched a ton of Joe Louis. And the thing that struck me about Joe Louis was how short and compact his punches were. He was a guy that didn't waste any energy. He was always relaxed. And the demeanor in that second Schmeling fight is he just looks like a sniper just getting ready because he's just going to walk him down and kill him. And he damn near did kill him. I mean, I think he had he suffered fractures in his skull and everything. And when you look at that, it was just how calm he was. And he was basically an executioner in that fight.
Yeah, he was totally primed. I'll jump in there. He was so determined. It's just like we all dream of, where everything comes together if we played sports and not at that level, obviously. None of us hit that level. But he was so primed physically and mentally for this fight, so ready to go. And it wasn't just words. He was a cold-blooded assassin in that fight. All he did is, Schmeling threw a few rights. He avoided them. His technique was a little different. Like I said, he was much crisper, faster. He was a different fighter, and so perhaps so was Schmeling. A couple of years older, maybe, but Louis was a couple of years older too. But I think he was probably right at the cusp of his prime, if not in his prime. He's 24 years old in 1938, maybe probably in his prime.
He was in his prime, I think. From watching all those films, that was as good as Joe got. And that was pretty damn good. Yeah. He
was just so on that night. And I don't – Schmeling could have been the 1936 Schmeling. That Louis, if that Louis had appeared in 1936, he'd have blitzed Schmeling, maybe not as fast, but he certainly would have. But, that was a primed Joe Louis, and undoubtedly one of the best heavyweights ever who ever lived in the top 5, easy top 3.
He's got to be top 2. To me, when I look at these guys, it's Ali and Louis, and then everybody else. You can fight about everybody else. Ali and Louis. Yeah. Because this is the thing. I don't think from that first Schmeling fight up through, probably 1947, 1948, he was damn near untouchable.
He was.
Yeah, I mean, fights where he struggled.
Jersey Joe Walcott, that one he really struggled.
Yeah, but he's also getting up there in age. But I'll give him all the way to there because, I mean, he's destroying Billy Conn in 8. And the other thing was this, and I think the first sign of somebody who's a great fighter is, even if you lose the first fight or you struggle, you come back in the second fight, you make the adjustments, you're even better. And I think, at least through his prime, we saw Arturo Godoy gave him a tough first fight. He destroys Godoy in the second fight. Same thing with Billy Conn. I think he was a guy that was just extremely intelligent in the ring and made the adjustments he had to make to win the fight.
Yeah, and you got to appreciate his dedication. I mean, it's funny because we watch all these heavyweights and they're struggling with this or that, coke or booze or ladies or whatever it is. But you look at Joe Louis and he was just a professional, through and through. I mean, the fact that he had this longevity is just incredible. I mean, to show up every time, and these are months on end, right? This isn't a guy fighting 2 times a year. This is a guy fighting every few months. A heavyweight champion. So that tells you that he was living probably a Spartan lifestyle where he wasn't consuming much in terms of sweets or, soda or any of that stuff. I mean, the guy was dedicated. And it's funny, that's why you see some of the results that he had, because he was that way. Again, I think that's part of the reason why you see these up and down performances nowadays, because, you have just too much time to dick around, frankly. And Lewis didn't really have that. He just basically from the time he started until the time he ended, you even get knocked out by Rocky Marciano. I mean, the dude was just a professional. And, you talked about the crispness of his shots. I think that's why the Ring Magazine rated him the #1 puncher of all time, not because he's necessarily the hardest puncher of all time. I mean, you could say Shavers had better one-punch power or Foreman or any of these other guys. But in terms of technique and just, little wasted motion, accuracy, finishing ability, there's just almost nobody. I mean, who can you even compare? I mean, in the heavyweight division itself, it's like he was an he was an absolute killer, man. He was just he was an absolute killer.
Too, Jeremiah, before I forget to ask it.
Okay.
You can finish your statement though, but I have a question.
Okay,
so I got to tell
ask
Jeremiah so I don't forget, because sometimes people ask questions and I find out 4 hours later. But go ahead.
Oh, no, I'm done. You can ask a question.
So the question is from Hamed, who, I get to go at this one first. How good do you regard Mike Tyson in his prime? He was on the verge of being one of the greatest before he got KO'd by Buster Douglas. Do you think you could hang with Frazier? Let me go with this. He could not hang with Frazier. The Frazier of March 15th, was it March 15th or 14th, 1971, would have broke it off in Joe Frazier or in Mike Tyson in about 2 rounds. Because you got to remember this. When you watch Joe Frazier fight, Joe Frazier had incredible head movement, better than Mike Tyson ever had, I think. At least in that night, up to his prime. You look at his fight against Jerry Quarry. The dude could fight, and he could bang. He was 5'10", 5'11", so him and Tyson close to the same size. Tyson weighed a little bit more. But this is the thing. Joe Frazier went toe-to-toe with Muhammad Ali 3 times, won 1 fight. All 3 were great fights. So the first and third were great fights. The second's debatable as whether it was great or not. And Joe Frazier had a shit ton of heart. Mike Tyson never did. I don't think Mike Tyson ever would have. I don't think that because Castillo Mato died and Robin Gibbons came into his life, that's why he wasn't great. He wasn't great because from the age of 12 or 13, when Castillo Mato took him under his wing, Castillo Mato did him no favors because he let him do whatever the fuck he wanted. And you cannot build a great athlete by acquiescing to him and let them do everything they want. And you look at his competition, there's nothing there. I mean, his 5 or 6 biggest fights were the ones where he got hurt and he never came back to win. So I'm not even going to hold the competition against him, John. My point is this. I can't think of what I think would be the top 10 greatest heavyweights of all time. None of those guys exist where I say, I never saw them hurt and came back and win. Because they did. They won rematches. The thing about Tyson is, in rematches, Razor Ruddock. He had an easier time the first time than the second time. Of course, Richard Steele helped with that. But I don't think Mike Tyson belongs in the top 20. I don't think he had the heart. And in the end, heart may be the most important thing when you're doing anything. John?
Yeah, I don't disagree. I might put him in the top 20. He had a run there where he was.
Yeah, I would throw him somewhere between 15 and 20 because he was a dominant badass until he fought somebody that wasn't afraid of him.
Exactly, and that's accurate. And Smokin' Joe, if he would have had any chance, Tyson, it would have been early. Because as we know, it took Smokin' Joe a while to start smoking. When he started smoking, boy, I mean, Oscar Bonavena almost stopped him in the first round in, I believe, 1966. And he knocked him down
but
twice.
Oscar Bonavena was a tough son of a bitch. Mike Tyson wasn't.
Well, okay, there's that. I think Mike Tyson was tough. I do. I believe it, but not
he
in
quit
the
against
sense
Holyfield.
Well, right. Everybody thought he would beat Holyfield. I know. I'm saying early in the fight, Tyson would have had a chance if he could have caught Joe Frazier. But when you got into the deep water, he'd have drowned. As he showed later in his career, he didn't really have that heart of a heavyweight champion that we associate with an Ali or Joe Louis, like we were saying. He had a massive heart. Larry Holmes' big heart. I mean, those guys are incredible. Mike Tyson, no. He was a what does Teddy Atlas say? He had to be leading. If he was leading, fine. If somebody started saying no, started coming back on him, he'd fold. And that's pretty much what happened later. I don't think those things you mentioned helped. Mike, the death of Customato, the other guy, what was his name? Bill, can't think of his name. Bill Clayton.
Bill Kaplan or Caton?
Bill
Caton. Yeah.
No, Caton. Bill Caton. He died, and I don't think that helped because they kind of kept him somewhat in line. That didn't help him. He didn't really listen to Kevin Rooney that much, a little bit, but then he started doing, and he got mixed up with Don King. None of that helped. If those guys had stayed around and lived, I think his career could have been better. But you're right. When he was in deep trouble, he didn't have the talent or the heart or whatever you want to say to pull himself out of it. He almost did in the Douglas fight when he knocked him down. You guys remember, I think, what was that round? Was that round 8?
Yeah.
Yeah, he knocked him down, and Douglas managed to get up. But he, that was the thing about him. And it was funny, back to my dad again. My dad kept saying, one of these days he's going to get beat because somebody's going to be able to take the shots and force him to really fight. And he's going to get tired, and he's not going to have. My dad, I don't know how he saw that, but he saw it. And that's pretty much what happened to Tyson.
Well,
but
if my dad was alive, he could tell you that I picked Evander Holyfield to be the one to do that in 1986 after I watched him against Kwawi, because Holyfield had a shit ton of heart. And the end, I think that's the most important thing. Now, I think Joe Frazier, after the first fight against Ali, I think that took something out of him. I don't think he was ever the same after that first fight. John.
Totally agree. I don't know if Jeremiah was going to jump in there. So I was just going to say this real fast. Totally agree, Jeremiah. What do you think? Do you agree that Joe Frazier wasn't the same after the March 8th fight with Ali, 1971?
Yeah, I think you can make that statement. I just wanted to address the Tyson thing real quick. I agree with you, John. I think it's a little bit scary early on just because Tyson was. The thing about it is you got to get him into deep waters to expose that heart. And right. Because Joe Louis, like he also said, takes a little while to warm up. I do agree. I think there could be some scary moments in the beginning, because Tyson was. If he had the dedication Joe Louis did, I don't think there's any question he'd be a top 5 guy. He had a level of speed and power that. It was incredible. It's an absolute rarity. But yeah, he didn't have it. So I think I fall in line with most of you guys where, it's going to be maybe a little bit scary early on, but I think he weathers a storm and then he gets late and then he ended up breaking Tyson down and get him out of there late. But I do think there's an argument that Tyson could be top 10. I just think there's so much play after the first 2 guys. I'm also with you guys in the sense that like Larry Holmes, proved that he had heart. It was very, very tough to get him down, let alone get him out. Holyfield, Lennox Lewis, even though he got stopped twice. But I do think once you get towards the bottom of the top 10, you get into guys like Sonny Liston, Vladimir Klitschko. Like Liston to me was,
I wouldn't
a big
put
scary
Sonny
guy.
Liston anywhere near the top 10 because Liston to me is kind of like Tyson, and when shit got tough, I mean, I don't remember too many Sonny Liston's fight where Sonny was in trouble and he came back and won either, John.
No,
I
can't.
John, because he's older, so I figured he may know.
Oh, okay. Thank you. I can't remember one either. He was another one that usually led because he dominated. They thought he was invincible before he fought Muhammad Ali. I mean, he put away Floyd Patterson quickly in the first round both times. Now, you could look back and say, well, obviously Floyd Patterson was a bit shinny, but still, Sonny Liston he had that telephone pole jab, and he was so scary, and the same thing. He was scaring guys even before they fought, and if you've watched his fights with Cleveland Williams, I mean they were pretty brutal, pretty ferocious battles, and no, I can't off the top of my brain here, I can't remember because when he got knocked out by Leotis Martin, and I was watching that fight in 1969.
He was old then.
He was old, right? But he got knocked down. I mean, he knocked Leotis Martin down, and he was getting beat up and stuff, and he got knocked out. I know he was old, but I can't think of anything that where he ever had to come back at that. Whenever he, like with Muhammad Ali or Cassius Clay in 1964, he was getting beat, and he got wobbled earlier, and I think he just basically said, I can't beat this guy.
Yeah, and I think that
we'll never. Sure.
I think the thing about Liston and Tyson is they would come out fast in the first minute, and they would realize real quick if they were in a fight or not, if you know what I mean. And I also think this, if you're a guy that's kind of a bully, you realize before the first bell goes off what you're in the ring with. So I don't know if that would have had any play on him and Frazier, but I tend to think it would. I don't know. But Jeremiah's younger.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. Liston to me seemed like a more methodical fighter than Mike Tyson was. But still, that's my thing is when you look at the top 10 and you're looking at the guys who actually showed heart, and it's funny because we're having this conversation and I'm actually thinking of Jack Dempsey just a little bit because I know he gets some flack because he didn't fight the best black guy of his day in Harry Wills,
right?
And his level of competition wasn't as high as some of the other guys, but he did show a tenacity and heart, right? I mean, he's the one who actually is often. Well, he's oftentimes quoted as, again, I'm paraphrasing here, but he's like, what did he say? A champion is not. It's like basically somebody who gets up when they're knocked down, and you know he did show that even though his level of competition was not quite some of the others, but it's still the thing. It's like once you get past Lewis, Ali, you know, Holmes, Marciano, you know, Jack Johnson, like so these guys who are a bit more proven, it's like you get into Jeffries. Yeah, you're getting to guys like George Foreman. I mean, George Foreman obviously showed that he had some heart as well. But once you get past those guys, again, you look at the list of a lot of people, and it's Mike Tyson, it's Sonny Liston. I mean, who are you gonna rate above him? Maybe Vladimir Klitschko, but Vladimir Klitschko seemed like one of those guys who didn't really like bullies. You know, maybe Vitali. I don't know. Ezra Charles had a bunch of defenses. I don't know. There's just a lot of leeway there, and that's why I don't really. To me, Tyson I think can be argued in the top 10, and same with Liston though. I don't have a solid list myself. I just think there's just so much play after the top few guys that you could just see that a good number of ways.
Well, at the top of my head, John, we got Ali, Lewis, Holmes, Lewis again, Marciano, Holyfield. Who else? That's a no-brainer that would fall into your top
Jack
10.
Johnson.
Jack Johnson.
I would have Dempsey.
I would have Dempsey also, just because of what he meant at that time, and he dominated his era. Only fought like 4 times, but that's all right.
Yeah, Dempsey, and then after that, then that's a good point by Jeremiah. It's pretty open on your interpretation or your opinion on who follows those guys. And Joe Frazier. Now, Joe Frazier, right? I mean, Joe Frazier beat Muhammad Ali.
Yeah, I would put Frazier there. I would put Foreman there. I think I would put Ezra Charles there before I would Mike Tyson.
I think Jeffries is a hard one to rate, but I think he can also be a top 10 guy too.
Yeah, because he was undefeated when he retired, and he beat a ton of Hall of Famers.
Was.
Yes, yeah, I actually calculated this, but I think almost a third of his entire career was spent against Hall of Famers. I know some of them were smaller than him, like Bob Fitzsimmons, but yeah, he fought a good number of guys who were well known.
Right. What about a guy like Gene Tunney? Just the win over Jack Dempsey's more than what Tyson had, wasn't it?
Twice. Yeah, and with a long count, you can bring that in if you want. But yeah, no, he was a great boxer. He fought Harry Greb all those times, so he was a hell of a fighter too. So that's the thing. There's some fighters that we forget about, like James J. Jeffries. I actually think he's underrated because of what happened in 1910. I mean, if you read about that and you think, this guy hadn't even had a fight in almost 6 years. I mean, how hard was that? I mean, this isn't about that, but it's like ruined his whole legacy in the sense that one loss, that was the only loss of his career. He was
that's all people bring up.
Yes, that's right. And he had heart. I mean, he got beat up by Bob Fitzsimmons in the second fight where he was bleeding and not knocked down, of course, but just in bad shape. And then he knocked out Bob Fitzsimmons. He was losing to James J. Corbett in their first fight, knocked him out in the 23rd round. So he had heart and gut and never gave up. So, yeah, it's unfortunate that it's just the Jack Johnson loss that people remember him. Now, he might not have beat Jack Johnson earlier. It's possible Jack Johnson might have had his number, but still, Jeffries deserves a certain amount of respect and deserves a lot of credit for what he accomplished.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot to be said with the Hall of Famers he beat and retiring undefeated that he did more than Tyson.
Yeah. Yeah.
And sure. I choose Vitali over Vladimir.
Yeah.
I like him better.
I think you can. Well, this is the thing is, I'm pretty open-minded, and I've said this before, but I'm pretty open-minded with people who, see these a wide variety of ways. Because I've seen historians who I respect who are like, hey, Larry Holmes fought a bunch of guys who were inexperienced and, didn't really beat a lot of good people, and so they rate him not that high. They think, Liston was, had Ali not been around, he would have been a dominant figure. And George Foreman said he was the scariest man he ever got in the ring with. And to me, there's just a lot of play because really Ali and Lewis are they're bona fide 1 and 2 in my opinion, just because of what they did. They were dedicated. And a lot of people forget that Muhammad Ali had 19 defenses of the heavyweight championship of the world. I mean, I'm not talking about alphabet defenses. He had 19 heavyweight championship defenses. So he was way up there too. I mean, I think that's more than Larry Holmes actually, if you count the time he spent as really the champion, right? Because I mean, if depending on when you view Larry Holmes as being the man, but yeah, so after Lewis and Ali,
I want John's opinion too. When was Larry Holmes the man? Do you think it wasn't until after he beat Muhammad Ali?
No, I think he was already the man before that. I think I remember thinking that he had improved so much. I saw him in some fight in the 70s, and he was good and everything, and he had that jab that he was so famous for. But he fought Ali in 1981, right? So I guess you could make an argument. 1980. Okay, you could make an argument either way, but I think anybody who, as much as I love Muhammad Ali, again, back to my dad again, it's all about Dad tonight. I can remember us talking about that, and I said, what do you think? And he goes, nah, and I go, nah, me either. I don't care if he looks so good. He threw us all off. He looked so good. He had his weight down. He looked like he did almost like in 1967. We were thinking about that, but he didn't have anything in there. So we knew how good Larry Holmes was. What got him in trouble was his attitude and some of his belligerence, and that's really what cost him. But as far as talent and what he was, and then later on what we saw when he got knocked down by Ernie Shavers, and he was pretty much out of it and got up and knocked out Ernie Shavers. I mean, he was special, and I understand some of his bitterness because he never did really get the credit that he deserved, and I think he gets it now, and I hope that it makes him happy because he certainly deserves it. He was one hell of a fighter, and I agree with you guys. I think it's Ali Lewis and Larry Holmes.
All right, we have another question from at the final tally. Who was the best heavyweight champion who never became champion? Jeremiah, we'll start with you.
The best heavyweight champion who never became champion.
The best heavyweight who never became champion. Did I read that wrong?
Yeah.
Shit happens. Go ahead, Jeremiah.
Okay. Yeah. No. Okay.
The best heavyweight
to never become champion. Let me try to reel these off real quickly because Vitali was never the champion. So we've got to understand that, I don't count guys being the champion unless they're the champion, right? Unless they beat the best. So Vitali was never considered the champion. I know the Ring had him as their guy for a little while, but I don't think that was universally recognized. Because I think they had him and Corey Sanders number 1 and number 2. Maybe I'm mistaken. I could be wrong.
I thought they were. I thought he was the champion because of that win.
Yeah, that's what I thought, but he's not widely considered to have been the man. So it's one of those things.
He was close enough to being the man. I think that they're looking for somebody more nondescript. Because, I mean, my first inclination is you think back early 20th century with guys like Harry Willis, Joe Giannetti, Sam Langford, those guys. See, y'all can give those answers. I'll give a different one, no, just because I didn't see those guys that much.
Yeah, well, I mean, those are good calls. I mean,
yeah, they're great calls, especially with Langford, because to me, we've talked about this before, just from reading about him. To me, Sam Langford's my top 2 or 3 all time, pound for pound.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think he started off as a featherweight, and then he ended up knocking out heavyweights. And not only that, he was knocking out good fighters when he was way past his best. Actually, if you take the magnifying glass to his record, you'll see that he knocked out Tiger Flowers when he was long past his prime. And I think he was struggling with his eyesight by that time. I think he stopped him in the 6th round or something. I'm not exactly sure. But I think, one of the calls of Sam Langford or, Joe Jeanette or Sam McVeigh, I think those are damn good calls. If you don't consider Vitali the man, I think that's an excellent call. I'm trying to think of some of these other guys too. I think, personally, I know I would probably get a little flack for this, but I think Alexander Povetkin is one of the better guys to have never won the heavyweight championship. Man, that's a tough one. Ken Norton, obviously. Ken Norton was never the man, and he arguably won. What?
What was that?
Jeremy,
say that again.
About Jerry Quarry. I mean, he couldn't beat any of the guys.
That's my guy.
They were. Yeah, that Jerry Quarry just popped in my head a little while ago. Yeah, because his timing when he came around was just so bad with those guys that was in his error. And he was damn good, and he knocked out Ernie Shavers in 1 round, and he just couldn't beat Muhammad Ali and Joe Frazier, and unfortunately, and George Foreman.
Plus, he had guys like Jimmy Ellis and Floyd Patterson who were damn good fighters too.
Yeah, and he beat both of those guys, and he was damn good, and he's just unlucky in the sense that he came. His time was their time. I mean, everybody always wonders the first when Ali came back, and the cut, in round 3, and Jerry Quarry was starting to come on, and Muhammad Ali was feeling a little tired. So what would have happened if Jerry Quarry hadn't got cut?
Yeah, and this is the thing, John, and the thing is impressive. We talk about guys only fight once or twice a day, or once or twice a year. 1967, these are Quarry's fights. He beats Brian London. He beats Alex Mitteff. He gets a draw with Floyd Patterson that I thought he won. He knocks out Billy Daniels. That was the worst fighter he fought, probably. And then he beats Floyd Patterson. And then he starts off 1968. He beats Thad Spencer. He loses a close decision to Jimmy Ellis. I mean, that's not too bad. And if you want to really see how good he is, you also get the Buster Mathis win. But the fight really that sold me on how good he was that first fight with Joe Frazier, which looks like a Hagler Hearns at a heavyweight in the first 2 or 3 rounds.
Yep. Yeah, he went toe-to-toe with Joe Frazier, and you talk about inside fighting and bombs and landing and taking shots. Talk about heart. I mean, God, that was brutal all the way, and they're just standing there throwing bombs at each other and landing. And, yeah, he was just unlucky. He didn't have the luck of the Irish in his career that time. He just didn't work out for him. And he was underrated a lot, Mike. I know you're not as old as me, obviously, and I'm the old man here. But I think he was ridiculed a lot because he couldn't beat the big guys, and then that's unfortunate because he was one hell of a fighter.
Yeah, he beat Ron Lyle too in a hell of a fight.
Sure did. Underdog. I think that fight. I think most people figured he'd lose that fight too when he fought Ron Lyle.
Yeah, and then after that, as you said, he took out Ernie Shavers in a round. He got a rematch with Frazier where he got his ass whooped. Fought Ken Norton, but he was pretty much shot by the time he get to the Norton and Zanone fights. Really, I think by the second Frazier fight, he was pretty much at the end of it. Is anybody else going to bring up the elephant in the room? Scott Ledoux?
Only you, Mike.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're not going to bring up Scott Ledoux.
You already broke the ice. I mean, if you want to make your case, go ahead.
2 times.
No, I'm good. I'll let it go for now. We all know what really happened.
Yeah, but I will say I have come down on a decision, and Sam Langford is my guy. I think he's the greatest heavyweight to never win a championship. I mean, again, how incredible. I mean, is there a historical precedent somewhere else where a guy has gone from featherweight to heavyweight and arguably beat legends in just about every single class that he stopped in? I mean, he beat Gons. That was was 140 pounds, so he was 7 pounds over the limit back then. So that's a little iffy, but Gons was still a great lightweight at the time. He arguably beat Barbados Joe Walcott, beat Ketchel in a fight that it wasn't a full-on match. He also, I think, starched Philadelphia Jack O'Brien, who was a great light heavyweight, and then he beat. I'm pretty sure he had a winning record over guys like Sam McVeigh and Joe Jeanette. Harry Wills was a little bit different because he was on the downside when Wills was coming up, but he still managed to beat Harry Wills a good number of times. So I think, to me, Langford is that guy.
Yeah, I think I would err on the side of Langford. I knew you would say that, so I would probably go with Jerry Corey then.
Yeah.
We have another question, too. Let's see. Do you regard Lennox Lewis a top 10 heavyweight over Holyfield and Vladimir Klitschko? My opinion is this. I think Evander Holyfield was greater. I think that Lewis was greater than Klitschko. I go with Holyfield because I still think the best Holyfield was probably 6 or 7 years before he fought Lewis. And the 2 knockout losses to Oliver McCall and Hasim Rahman still stick with me whenever I rate Lennox Lewis, John.
Yeah, that's funny. I've had some really fierce discussions with people about Lennox Lewis, and that's exactly the same point that I make.
But he would be in my top 10.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It sits in my craw that he got knocked out by those guys. But yeah, he was talented. He was a heck of a fighter, good fighter. But he is in the top 10. Yeah, I agree. But I'd put Holyfield in front of him. I think Holyfield deserves to be rated lower and Lewis above him because, he was past his prime when they fought those 2 times. I'm talking about Holyfield and. Lennox was the kind of guy that occasionally would frustrate me because I would watch him and think, God, and Emmanuel Stewart, if you remember, Emmanuel Stewart was constantly saying, come on. He wouldn't go after guys sometimes, but he was a little methodical at times and a little workmanlike, but definitely a very good fighter. I wouldn't consider him a great fighter. I'd say very good, but he's in the top 10 though.
Jeremiah?
Yeah, I'd probably rate him Lewis, Holyfield, and then the other one. But yeah, that's it was one of those things like Lewis, to me, he did get knocked out by a couple of guys. He did come back to beat him. I mean, it's easy to hang that over his head. But Lennox Lewis, to me, at his best, was pretty damn good. I mean, there aren't very many guys in history I would favor over a prime Lennox Lewis.
Ray Mercer.
Yeah, maybe. Maybe.
Because I saw Ray Mercer beat him. So
yeah,
I thought he did at least. I don't know.
Yeah, well, yeah, but right. Well, I know, but it seems like everybody's getting close decisions like that. I know a lot of boxing fans like to make a stink about that with Mayweather and Castillo and some other fights. But if you examine the record of just about any great fighter throughout history, it's like they've all had a close one. I mean, you start from the bottom. Ricardo Lopez got a draw that I thought he lost against Rosendo Alvarez. Mayweather, Castillo, Larry Holmes, Tim Witherspoon.
Dude, if you're going to start talking about bad decisions we've seen, this will take all night.
I know, but what I'm saying,
the last year.
Yeah. I know it seems like it's gotten worse, hasn't it? I mean, it's pretty awful.
Look at all the Ali fights, because that was one of my big claims a couple weeks ago, John. When you look at Ken Norton, if he gets a decision in either one of the other Ali fights, and he gets a decision against Holmes, people are ranking him in the top 5 of all time.
Yeah, it could be. I mean, a lot of people felt that the young Cassius Clay got a gift against Doug Jones in 1963.
I don't. I actually think Clay won the fight. I think it was one of those fights where not much was expected from Jones, so I think people kind of overrated it.
Yeah, I thought he won too, but a lot of people didn't agree. They thought that he won.
I don't even think Ali's wife agreed.
Yeah, but he was probably cheating her, so he probably didn't really. She didn't care anyway.
That's why, yeah.
Cash out, yeah. Hell, whatever. She was sleeping with Doug the night before the fight, but that is not true. Jeremiah said that too, not me. So, all right. So, you good for next Wednesday, John? We'll talk a little Rocky Balboa.
Sure. Next Wednesday, you bet. Talk Rocky.
And I want to thank everybody that asked the questions tonight. Jeremiah, do you have any final comments?
No, I'm always appreciative for everybody who tunes in week in and week out. I mean, I've just been pretty surprised by the amount of listens that we get, and this commenting thing seems like it's been pretty regular, and all these guys who are chiming in, a lot of them have become regular. So it's just nice to kind of build a community around what we're doing, and I hope you guys continue to chime in.
All right, and also I know, John, we got a couple things to talk about with you before we wrap it up. Number one, Intimate Warfare. I think it's one of the best boxing books I've read in the last couple of years. You want to give everybody a little quick synopsis and tell them where they can buy the book at?
Oh, yeah. Intimate Warfare, Arturo Gatti and Mickey Ward, their fight after their friendship, their how it all happened, how they ended up fighting each other, how Gatti was, he figured he beat Mickey Ward really easy in the first fight, and anybody who knows boxing knows what happened in the first fight, and their whole arc of a story about as two men who had those fights, and anybody who watched those fights, the third fight, we all remember it, where they hugged, and I mean, these guys were real blood brothers, and that's what Dennis Taylor and myself thought of as we were writing this book, and we ended up just having the utmost respect for both of them. I had it anyway before we even wrote the book, but doing all the research and talking about their fights. I mean, I love writing about their fights. I love writing about the build-up, and Dennis with the whole historical part, the biographies of the two guys. And yeah, we loved it, and the response has been incredible. You go on Amazon.com, obviously, just go in and type Intimate Warfare. You'll see a great picture by the brilliant Ed Mulholland, and we made it black and white on purpose because we thought of those guys. They were throwback fighters. They were 1950s fighters, Arturo Gatti and Mickey Ward. They were Gillette Friday night fights. That's what we had in our brain, and that's why the picture is black and white. And yeah, you go on Amazon, Intimate Warfare, you'll see it by Dennis Taylor and myself, and pick up another copy. We love writing it, and we love that the boxing people seem to be enjoying it quite a bit.
All right, and also every Sunday night you do the Ringside Boxing Show with Dennis Taylor. You want to tell everybody what we got in store this Sunday night?
Yeah, we were really fortunate. He's in the heat of his training camp, obviously, and I'm going to build it up a little bit. He's got, I think, undoubtedly the most important fight of his career. There's a lot of intangibles going into this one. If he loses, people are going to mock him because he lost to an old man. If he wins, people are probably going to say you beat an old man. So there's some people. So there's a lot of that going on. And we had Keith Thurman on, if you haven't figured it out. And Keith is one of our favorite guests. He's very articulate, very honest too. You know, he said that he's like, well, what can I do? And that's true. You can't please everybody. And Keith is really turning it up. He talks about his camp. He talks about what he expects from Manny. He talks about what he's going to try to do early in the fight against Manny Pacquiao. And it's a little shorter than we would have liked because Keith was doing a lot of interviews today, but it's about 18-minute interview, and he doesn't dodge anything. Unlike in boxing, no ducking. He answers all the questions very honestly and sincerely, and I think boxing fans will enjoy it.
All right, we got a comment from @TheFinalTally who says, great responses to my question. Thank you. But Jeremiah was wrong. Mike and John are much smarter than him. I just threw that in at the end just for the hell of it. But,
we're older, that's for sure.
Yeah,
Jerk.
That's why we're smarter. All right,
Well,
at least
older,
nobody called
yeah.
Jeremiah a racist tonight, so we're doing good there. Ain't that right, J. Joe?
Oh. Wow.
Yeah, it's whenever you put Vasil Lomachenko on the top of your pound-for-pound list, I guess that just brings out the, the seething anger in some of these people.
Oh.
Well, it is kind of racist because he's overrated.
I don't agree.
I think Scott
I
Ledoux
agree
would
with
beat him.
Jeremiah.
Oh,
Who's going to beat him?
nah.
Scott Ledoux would have kicked his ass.
Oh, Scott Ledoux again, of course, yeah.
Yeah. Did I show you my Scott Ledoux autograph picture I got?
Oh, yes.
Okay. I sent that to everybody in my friends list. If you didn't get it,
I
drop
got
me
it.
a line. I'll put the picture up on Twitter. Make sure you follow
I
us
got it.
at Grueling Truth. You can follow the Ringside Boxing Show at Ringside Boxing Show. Correct, John?
That's correct.
You can follow
Yep.
Jeremiah Preisser. I don't know. What's your Twitter handle? It's like Griffo's Handjob or something, right?
What the hell, man? Whatever, Goodpaster. Okay. Listen,
Jeremiah Lomachenko, right? That's his handle on
that
Twitter,
you should
right?
change it to that.
Yeah, I should. Yeah, no, but it's Griffo's hanky.
Oh, Hanky. My eyesight's not
Hank.
that good, and I didn't
Oh.
have my reading glasses when I was looking at it. I want to remind everybody, we will be back tomorrow night, hopefully with Alex Ramos. I got to call him tomorrow and make sure he remembers so we can do that. Check out the Sheridan Report tomorrow at 3 o'clock Eastern. And then Friday night, we'll be back with Nate Tubbs, who's now a boxing promoter. Once knocked Corey Sanders out, his brother is former kind of the heavyweight champion. I think it was the WBA champion at the time. Him and Tim Witherspoon and Greg Page used to trade it back and forth just for fun. And I think whoever had the belt at the time got to eat it like Sizzler for free for like a year.
Okay.
They'd have both been in better shape, though, and those fights would have been much better if they'd have been fighting like Lifetime's Sizzler. But, all right, guys, you can hear all of our shows on iHeartRadio, iTunes, TuneIn, Spreaker, Stitcher, Spotify, wherever you find sports podcasts. You'll find The Grueling Truth. So, for John Raspanti, Jeremiah Preisser, I'm Mike Goodpaster. You've been listening to The Grueling Truth, where the legends speak.